Hey, bartender. Excuse me, bartender. Can I get a drink? Come on, please. Come on, bartender. There's nothing funny to be said here. This is just sad.
Do you live, eat, and sleep the hotel industry? Looking to brush up on your game? You've come to the right place. Welcome to No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast, with your host, Glenn Hausman.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the No Vacancy Podcast with me, your host, Glenn Hausman. I am excited and delighted once again to have you coming back with us each and every week. Man, I can't believe we're well over 2 years into the show. This is our 112th episode right now, the standard show. And if you haven't been checking out all of those great bonus episodes that we've had, I encourage you to dive into those right now. And if this is the first time you're joining us, be sure to subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Just text the word hotel to 66866. That's the word hotel to 66866. I mean, you can't get any easier than that. Also, subscribe to the podcast wherever finer podcasts are found, at Apple Podcasts and all of those great places, Google Play Store, Stitcher, all those kind of places, and check out novacancynews.com. Now, of course, the show is brought to you in part by Duetto, my favorite revenue strategy technology platform. You know that thousands of hotels are using this platform every single week to make more money. We've talked about it. You like making more money. I like making more money. Let's make money together. Check out getrevenueresults.com and go to Duetto and find out how they can help you. And if you go to our novacancynews.com website and click on the Duetto ad, you're going to get an opportunity for an amazing white paper on the blueprint for taking back business from the OTAs. And I know you want to do that. Also, if you haven't checked out the first 3 episodes of our tech show, those are up right now on the No Vacancy podcast feed on novacancynews.com and at shr.global at Sabre Hospitality Resources. They're nice enough to sponsor that show. And I'm co-hosting that one with Estella Hale over there. And we've got those other great shows coming soon. We are so close to launching the 20-episode season of The Design Show and my new show with Anthony Melcuri of Travel Channel's Hotel Impossible, Extreme Hotels, and other shows that he does. We're getting close on that show, too. Anthony and I have been talking. We're working on our logo design right now. We're super excited about it. That show should be launching really, really soon. Whew, I think I need a little deep breath. Got that out in 2 minutes. So one of the things that I get excited about is not talking about millennials. Nothing personal, millennials. I do love you out there. You're doing great stuff, and I really think you're going to save our world, but I'm tired of talking about you. I'm very jealous. As a Gen Xer, I've been forgotten about, and soon you millennials are going to be forgotten about too. Why? Because now we're going to start talking about Generation Z, my kids' generation, the next generation, the ones that are going to be going into hotels in the future. And I am so excited to welcome to the show. We've got Miss Stacey Paul. She's with Innovation for Travel at UNiDAYS. I don't know how I screwed up that title. I messed that up. And she's the head of travel innovation for UNiDAYS. I messed that up. Stacey, I had your name in there twice. I forgot to change your title once. I'm so sorry. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Glenn. Thanks for having me.
All right, so head of travel innovation at UNiDAYS, pretty cool. Why don't you explain a little bit to our audience what UNiDAYS was? Because today we're going to be talking about this great survey that you folks did in conjunction with Ad Age Studio 30, and I'd like them to understand why UNiDAYS is such an important company and focusing on doing this study.
Sure, absolutely. So UNiDAYS is a student affinity network. We have 10 million Gen Z college students across the globe who are members, and our job is to bring together those students and leading brands to offer students exceptional discounts and experiences. And we recently partnered with Ad Age Studio 30, as you said, to do a global survey of 12,000 of our members across the globe to really get a deep read into their travel habits and preferences. And what we found was really interesting and surprising. So I'm excited to talk about that with you today.
I'm excited to talk to you about it too, Stacey, because you are right. I would be a very bad host if I didn't have any clue of what we're going to be talking about today. I know, guys, make fun of me. I usually am completely unprepared going into these types of interviews, but not today. That's because I'm excited. I'm excited, Stacey, to learn how different these folks are. Because, Stacey, I'll tell you something. We get told time and time again that the world has radically changed in an entirely new direction. And I don't want to, I don't want to blow it for you, but I'm getting the feeling that based on these surveys, well, maybe people got a little bit ahead of themselves and the generational differences are really vast enough that everyone shouldn't panic about where we are with the state of travel today, because these Generation Z people are doing it differently than those millennial folks.
Yeah, they really are. There are a couple of really salient facts and points that came out when we looked at the results of the survey. I think the first one, which will come as no surprise actually, is that Gen Z loves to travel. 99% of them told us that they love to travel. More than 2/3 of them travel more than 50 miles at least every 3 months. And they have the money to get out there. So there's this notion of the broke student mentality, because at the moment, most Gen Zers are in college. And it's simply not true. They work to save up money to travel. And when they do so, 69% of them travel on a budget, but with the occasional splurge. So they have some disposable income to spend where they feel it matters. And they're foodies. So when they travel, if they come across a unique dining experience, they're going to shell out the money to take advantage of that.
Wow. Okay. So I want to, my new favorite term of the month right now is let's unpack this, Stacey, because I want to learn about each of these different elements. The first thing, that whole notion of that Generation Z doesn't have their own money. It seems to me to be a carryover from how we're told repeatedly that millennials had no money, but they seem to be traveling in mass numbers. Where are these kids getting this money from? Is it summer jobs, working at the Gap on the weekends during the year? What's the general place that they're getting it from? Or maybe they just got wealthy mom and dads.
Yeah, I think some of them have wealthy mom and dads. Some of them definitely fund their travel with help from their parents. But most of them are working to save up, whether that means working at school or working outside of school, what have you. These are kids who came of age during the recession. So they're frugal by nature. They watch every dollar. And they're going to work to save up those dollars to spend on things that they really care about. And travel is at the top of the list.
So the one thing that we saw with millennials is we kind of moved, and I think that the Great Recession had a way to do this. And for those of you who've seen me in any of my keynote speeches, I talk about this aspect a lot, that since the Great Recession, we really transformed, Stacey, I believe, fundamentally from a materialistic society to an experiential society. And I think that's why travel seems to be so important too. Those millennials and now the Generation Z people, plus perhaps, and maybe you have some insight into this, I kind of feel like everything is so inexpensive these days, relatively speaking, when we're talking about material things. Everything is like $20 disposable and from China, right? That there doesn't seem to be a value on that sort of stuff. When you have everything, in a sense, you don't want anything in a sense, except maybe those experiences. Am I right or wrong? How do you see this whole thing?
Yeah, completely right. That statistic has been quoted pretty frequently where, experiences are becoming much more popular and valuable than tangibles. And I think, there's this whole wave in travel right now that's white hot around tours and experiences. Airbnb has it, Booking.com launched it, and Gen Z is taking advantage of that as well. They would much rather spend their money on memorable things that they can then post to their social feeds. That matters too, than go out there and buy stuff. Now, they still like to buy stuff, and they need to buy stuff in order to travel. But these experiences are really at the forefront of where they want to put their money to work, for sure.
Right, because I get the idea, Stacey, that if you had that shiny new thing or that exciting experience, I think that millennials and Generation Zers in particular are going to go for that experience over that shiny object, right? I think that's kind of where we're getting at.
Absolutely. And I think social media has a lot to do with that. Gen Z is the first generation that are digital natives rather than digital immigrants. You mentioned you're a Gen Xer. I am as well. And, it's been a little bit of a transition to adopt social media and get used to that. These kids were born with phones in their hands, And so they have these social media feeds and they scroll through them and see pictures of the world and people out there having these unusual, authentic experiences, and they want to get out there and do the same stuff.
Excellent. Now, for those of you scratching your head and go, digital immigrants, digital natives? Well, I'll give you the quick 30 seconds on that. Digital immigrants are like myself and Stacey, Gen Xers that didn't really grow up with all of the full panoply of technology that we had available, that we have available today. Therefore, we're immigrating to using those technologies as we get older. When you're a digital native, you're born into using those technologies. Kids picked up those iPads at, when they were babies. They have a better inherent sense of how to use that newer technology, which is why they are digital natives, because it's a native aspect of their lives. I think I did that one okay. Stacey, do I get your approval on that?
Yep, perfect.
All right, excellent. So, I'm curious as to how these kids are traveling, if you have any information on that, because to me, I have a feeling it's not necessarily to go and go to the top of the Empire State Building, but my gut tells me that it's probably more to go on a road trip with friends, maybe to that music festival or some sort of other event that's taking place. Do you have any anecdotal or other evidence to bear out how they're choosing to go ahead and utilize their traveling experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. It differs a little bit by region of the world.
Right.
I think when you look at Gen Z students in the U.S., they're much more apt to pile in their car and drive to that music festival or visit a national park. When we talk to students in the U.K., for example, they're hopping on a train and going to visit multiple countries.
Yeah.
But, overall, the trend that we're seeing is away from these beach vacations that defined spring break of, say, the 1990s, and more towards urban adventures and outdoor adventures. So more than half of students globally told us that that's the type of vacation they now seek out, urban or outdoor adventure. The beach is still popular, but losing a little bit of its luster.
Yeah, I'm not a big beach fan myself. Too much sand, getting in places that are uncomfortable. I hate finding it 3-4 days later and going, what the heck? I'd rather hang out at the pool. I'd rather go to a music festival. And, Stacey, I don't know, since you're also a Gen Xer, I'm wondering if you had these experiences in college for spring break where you'd go to the bulletin board and you'd see, oh, there's a trip being planned to Florida. And then you'd pay this money and you'd stay in a really horrible hotel, but they'd drive you down there on a bus and you wouldn't have to worry about that. Now, that was a spring break party.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You drive down or you fly down to Florida. You get the all-inclusive package.
Yep.
You don't have to worry about anything for a week. Everything's taken care of for you. And I think now students like to be a part of that planning phase. They want to know, what are the cool restaurants they should check out? What should they eat when they get there? What are the experiences they absolutely shouldn't miss? So I think it's definitely a different scene now from when it was when we went on spring break, for example.
Oh, yeah, it sure is. And I can't imagine Gen Zers drinking what we had, buckets of alcohol. I mean, just giant, like literal buckets.
9 straws.
Not figurative. You guys that are my age know exactly what I'm talking about. So the interesting thing that you had here, and we'll get into people how they prefer to stay in a minute, but we're talking about food in a lot of ways. You say that the survey said the number one activity on a trip is eating out. I'm not surprised, but what's the deal there? I'd love a little bit more depth on that.
Yeah, so we're definitely seeing students liking to eat out more on vacation. When we asked students what they like to do when they travel, the number one activity they said was eating out, followed by sightseeing and museums and outdoor adventures. And I think that speaks to the fact that they're more adventurous and they like to explore new things to do. I think food in and of itself has gotten so much more attention in the last few decades, and Gen Zers are jumping on that bandwagon. And when they go to Nashville or Houston or Prague or wherever they are, they want to search out the hottest thing to eat in that destination and make sure that they don't miss out on that experience.
Right. Let's coin a new phrase right now. I think that we're talking the difference between foodie immigrants and foodie natives, because I feel like,
Absolutely.
right, Gen Zers came up in the post-Food Network era. They came up in the food photo Instagram era as well. So their relationship with foods and what they think about it is completely different. And to me, I think food and dining really plays into the whole notion of understanding other cultures and having that full-up experience when you travel somewhere else, because nothing tells you more about society than those food and those museums.
Yeah, and this reminds me of a trend that is so popular now in the hospitality industry, which is having hotels embrace their local community,
Yep.
right? So we've all heard a lot about how when you're in a hotel in New York or Austin, or in Dublin, that hotel is now reflecting its local community and bringing that local community into the hotel so that its guests really feel like they're experiencing what it's like to live there. This is very different from when I worked in the hotel industry, where we tried to make every hotel that fell within a particular brand reflect these brand standards that were relatively generic in nature. And so now, as hotels are folding in these local experiences, I think Gen Z is part of that trend. That's exactly what they look for. When they go to a city, they want to experience that city as it exists. They don't want to stay in like a sterile box that's not reflective of wherever they happen to be.
Now, speaking of staying, the thing that really, I think, surprised me most about all of this survey, because everything to me is almost intuitive, but you report here that unlike their millennial counterparts, Gen Zers actually prefer hotels over Airbnb and vacation rentals. That just about floored me, because I hear the opposite every day about millennials and other folks too.
That, to me, was the most surprising statistic to come out of this. I had to double and triple check it.
Right.
But that's exactly what we found. Globally, 57% of students, the highest percentage, told us that they prefer a hotel or motel over Airbnb. Only 16% said that they like to stay in Airbnbs. Now,
Wow.
I don't know if that's because of affordability. Maybe they look for an economy hotel or an economy motel and it's actually cheaper than an Airbnb, or if the industry shies away in general from the university student. We're still kind of mulling over that and digging into it a little more, but it was really surprising and a breath of fresh air, frankly, for the hotel industry.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you, Stacey, because that to me is the scariest thing, is how do you compete against a mind shift towards folks wanting to stay in Airbnb. I know we talk about the AHLA and other organizations trying to do their part to make sure that it's a level playing field between those professional Airbnb operators, for example, and hoteliers, for example. But to see there's actually something that's potentially being generated by the people themselves, I think is very encouraging. How do you think hotels then could leverage this potential opportunity to lure those younger Generation Z travelers to create, a future generation of hotel stayers?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really important point, because when you think about Gen Z, they are the population with the highest lifetime value. So it should be very important to hotel providers to have them top of mind. As to what they can do to encourage that population to stay with them, I think they're doing a lot of the right things already. The thing we talked about earlier, where they're reaching out to the local community and involving them. I think creating and developing offers with this population in mind is something for hotels to think about. Again, right now they're traveling on a budget, but 5-10 years from now, when they're out in the workforce and have more disposable income, hotel brands, especially the larger ones, will be able to migrate these students through their brand umbrellas. So when you think about, a Marriott, a Wyndham, a Hilton, with multiple brands at multiple price points, you start out courting Gen Z at a price point that's that's, amenable to them. And then you migrate through more upscale brands as they age and enter the workforce.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think really plays into that strategy that the big hotel companies are already trying to pursue. But it's a new wrinkle, a new flavor, so to speak. I love that the survey pointed out here that the average Gen Zer spends between $250 to $750 on average per trip, depending, I guess, on the purpose for that trip. Now, I think about in terms of the hotel business, you get 4, 5 of those kids going together. I think together they can afford more than an economy hotel room, should they put value on that for sure. And then the meals as well is what they put value on. So they have a lot of other money left to spend in those areas, or you said they're looking for museums and outdoor activities. Perhaps it's free museums, student discount museums, and then going to parks and stuff like that, which might not have a cost associated with it. Any hunch on how they're spending their money beyond the hotel and food?
Yeah, I think they're spending a lot of it on, to your point, experiences when they get there. And I think you made another really good point, which is that although the $250 to $750 price point may not seem like a lot, these students do travel in packs. So you get many of them staying together, booking their experiences together, and so they're able to pool their money. And they do travel, again, on a budget, but with the occasional splurge. So I think they look for high and low things to do. I think they couple the free museums with an incredible dining out experience, with an excursion that they book beforehand and pay money for. So I think they couple the inexpensive with the expensive, where they feel that it's something special.
Right. I think that is pretty logical in itself as well. You find that 1 or 2 things that you want to do that are particularly important to you, and that perhaps you save money elsewhere. I think that's very much akin to how we saw families vacationing during the Great Recession, where they would still go out on the road, and maybe they'd have to spend a little bit more money on gas, but they would eat maybe more at a fast food restaurant instead of a white tablecloth restaurant in order to be able to still take that vacation.
Right, absolutely. One other point that I want to make, going back to how hotels can market to Gen Z, Gen Zers are their own little marketing machines. So they are posting on social media at least every day, if not multiple times a day, and they're tagging their location.
Right.
So once you have their loyalty, they're going to spread the word for you. And I think make your marketing work even harder for you.
Could you give some examples? One of the examples that I typically give is that creating those social media moments within your hotels. For example, I've used this before at the Margaritaville Resort in Hollywood, Florida. They have a 14-foot tall flip-flop that everybody seems compelled to have to take a photograph with and then send it out on their social media channels, right? I think that works as a great model for, engaging people to promote your business. But how do you see Gen Zers helping to promote hotels when they dig something?
Yeah, absolutely. If a hotel or resort can develop an Instagrammable location, I think that that works wonders for them, because it becomes something that almost compels people, and Gen Zers in particular, to capture it and post it on their feed as sort of a badge of honor. So when a hotel, for example, is thinking through its design plans, that doesn't have to be, sort of a focal point of the plan, but certainly when and if there's a place to fold in something that naturally speaks to a memorable photograph, I think that's a smart move to make. Excellent.
Any other tips that you have that hoteliers could connect better with Gen Z?
I think having a smart social media strategy is essential. And, just thinking differently when you think about Gen Zers. These are students who have an 8-second attention span. So you don't have a lot of time to reach them. When you do, you have to be
I'm sorry,
effective.
could you repeat that? I wasn't paying attention. I can only handle 7 seconds. Just kidding. I didn't mean to cut you off like that. I do that frequently for terrible jokes, so my apologies. Stacey, please repeat that.
So Gen Zers, it's hard to reach them.
Right.
They have this very short attention span. They don't pay attention to traditional media in the way that previous generations did. And they seek brands that reflect their values. So they seek brands that give back. That's a tall order, but once brands accomplish it, they will generate lifetime loyalty among this population. There's a lot of chatter that Gen Zers are not brand loyal. There's still some debate about that. But there's one school of thought that says they're fiercely loyal once you get their attention and once you lock them in.
That's what I think, Stacey, and I'll tell you and all the listeners out there, how can you be 20 years old and be brand loyal? You've hardly figured out who you are, let alone all of the adult brands, because as you're becoming a brand that you relate to, you might have a brand of toothpaste that your mom and dad forced you to have growing up, and you might have that pattern, but everything else pretty much, I think, is open to discovery and learning, and to think that anyone's going to be brand loyal at that age is, I think, just a foolish assumption to make. And then secondly, Stacey, I've got 14-year-old twin boys, and I watch how they absorb content and media and interact very differently than our generation did. My kids, after they were toddlers and Sesame Street was out, they have not watched a television show since. They are all about watching YouTubers play games and stuff like that. And I don't think that older folks, especially in the hotel industry, are connecting in the new way that those Gen Zs are available to be talked to about brands.
Yeah, absolutely. Traditional media, when it comes to travel marketing in particular, is falling by the wayside. Mm-hmm. I think, marketing channels will evolve so that brands continue to connect with Gen Z. I think, to your point, traditional TV advertising doesn't work for this generation. They're all about video on demand. They're all about YouTube. They're all about social media. And so brands, and again, travel brands in particular, need to think about new and novel ways to meet them.
How about I know we didn't talk about this at all in the survey that you have, but what about the idea of influencers? Because if they're not into traditional advertising, then hey, how about that celebrity, that sports figure, that music artist, saying, hey, I like this product? Is that more relevant in today's day and age than, say, it was back in the 80s in our formative years?
It is more relevant. I think that that type of marketing still works and works very well. Mm-hmm. I think Gen Zers also respond to not necessarily a celebrity influencer, but more someone who's maybe a little more under the radar, but who they can relate to. So you could be a travel influencer who most people have never heard of, but you might generate millions of followers on Instagram because you're going to places and doing things that resonate with Gen Z, and they're following you, and they're really interested in what you're up to. So I don't think you necessarily have to be a brand name celebrity to generate considerable influence among this population.
No, that's true. But you definitely, being a YouTube celebrity or an Instagram celebrity, certainly helps. I've seen it. I've had the opportunity to hang out with a lot of these creative people, and it's amazing to see how you could just go on vacations or travel experiences, take images of it, and have millions of people follow you and like what you're saying and be able to influence their travel buying decisions. All pretty fascinating stuff to me. Stacey, anything else before we wrap up here that you feel is important to talk about as head of travel innovation at UNiDAYS?
No, I think we've talked about everything. I think this is a very interesting population that is still under the radar, as you said, because so much of the focus for the last decade plus has been on millennials. But move over millennials, Gen Z is coming at you, and I'm glad we got the chance to really explore their travel habits today. I think that they're going to turn the travel industry on its head. All
right, Stacey, it's time for that part of the show. I know it's my favorite part, and it's sure to be yours. Good. Give me a good, hearty, shameless plug.
Thanks so much, Glenn. Come visit us at www.myunidays.com. UNiDAYS is a global student affinity network with 10 million Gen Z college students worldwide. We connect leading brands with those students to create memorable partnerships and experiences.
Excellent. I love that. And also, if you want to learn a lot more about what they're up to and how to connect better with Generation Z, UNiDAYS has this great site called GenZinsights.com, and that'll give you those tips on how to engage Generation Z and build a loyalty for a lifetime. Remember, these folks are young and healthy and could give you business for decades to come, and you definitely want to check that out. Stacey, thanks so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Glenn.
Man, I hope you guys learned a lot. I know I sure did. Really fascinating, really interesting stuff. Now we're going to be right back after this commercial with a great message. And just don't forget this. Always set the gear shift to the high gear of your soul. We'll be right back after this message.
Have a question for your host, Glenn? Tweet him now at Traveling Glenn. No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast. We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Glenn here. So a couple of months ago, I had Andy Alexander, he's the president of Red Roof, on this exact podcast. And we did it during the AHOA conference. And let me tell you, I got to know a lot about the Red Roof team and the brand. For example, did you know Red Roof offers one of the highest RevPARs in the economy segment and has been #1 in online guest reviews 8 years running, according to Clarabridge? Well, they're careful to make sure standards reflect guest experiences, they're fully tested and well priced. In fact, they manage about 20% of the system, so they have skin in the game too. You know, a few years ago also, another great thing they did is they introduced Red Roof Plus, a brand extension that created the upscale economy segment, and it's a great product with wood-like flooring, high-end bedding, spa-inspired baths, enhanced landscaping, and more, all based on customer research. And it's having a dramatic effect on owners' financial results. I know when I first saw it, I was blown away by how much you could do in an economy place to make it seem extremely upscale. I guess that's where they got upscale economy from. So more recently, they introduced the Red Collection, which is an amazing group of unique hotels that are city-centric, but also inspired by the vibe and culture of the neighborhoods in which they're located. And that gives franchisees the opportunity to affordably invest in new markets with a brand that has a solid track record. But the most interesting thing I learned, all from Red Roof franchisees themselves. Again and again, they tell me, genuine relationships, real results. It isn't just a slogan, it's just how Red Roof operates. Learn more by visiting redrooffranchising.com or call 888-473-8861 and tell them Glenn sent you.
Back to the show. It's No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast with your host, Glenn Hausman.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the No Vacancy Podcast. Thanks for sticking around after the advertising. I'm excited to have you here today, and man, I'm really looking forward to this interview today because I'm a big fan of the Caribbean. Now, as a New York guy, I always grew up going to the Caribbean for holidays and stuff like that. Not like I was able to go away every single year, but going there was simple, it was easy, it was fun, and it was an integral part of, I think, us East Coasters' life. Kind of like how Hawaii is all about West Coast and Mexico is more West Coast. And one of the things that really surprises me most about the Caribbean is just how incredibly amazing it is. When you grow up going to the Caribbean, you kind of think, oh, it's just whatever, no big deal. But then you go to other places around the world and you realize what a special place it is. So one of the premier hoteliers from there is Mr. Mark Durliat. He's the CEO and principal of Grace Bay Resorts, who's having their 25th anniversary this year of being in that part of the world. So I wanted to have him come on and talk about what it's like creating a vibrant business that is in that part of the world. Mark, how are you today, sir?
Good morning, Glenn. It's great. I'm great. I'm feeling good, and looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty pumped too. So I'm excited. So, what on earth made you decide as a hotelier to start a business in the Caribbean in 1993? Because most of the guys I know were thinking about entering the business with branded hotels where they could just make some money in their local markets or in the mainland USA, not some of these other Caribbean countries out there. So what were you thinking about being a guy who graduated from USC?
Well, I suppose like many in the travel business, I had a case of itchy feet right out of school, and
right.
Spent a good portion of my time over in Europe and South Africa. And in South Africa, I started a business that effectively mimics what we do now, which is very much a residential hotel sort of themed kind of very luxurious concept in our resort business. And when I returned from South Africa back in whenever it was, I had stumbled upon the Caribbean. In particular, I had scoured just in probably maybe a dozen islands through the Caribbean, and the idea being that I wanted to explore expanding the condo hotel business model that I had started really expanded in South Africa.
Right.
And somebody mentioned Turks and Caicos to me, and at that point in time, it seemed like I was going to Kazakhstan or Timbuktu, and it was really unknown. And I just felt when I arrived there, it just had some potential that was really untapped.
So that seems to me like a pretty gutsy move to go to a place, because Turks and Caicos, I don't really think came into the vernacular for the typical American traveler until much more recently. So back in the early 90s, you're right. You're like, you might as well put an outpost on Mars. Pretty gutsy move. What made you actually pull the trigger to do a development in that region?
Well, there was some momentum, and it was one of those destinations that we were still pre 9/11, and so there was still some travelers who were willing to go to the outskirts of the universe to see something special. And the Turks and Caicos kind of had this mystical reputation as being almost like a Maldives kind of place, in that you get there and the sand is so pure and the water is so crystal clear that you just can't believe that you're actually that enjoying it. And so we just felt that we with some time and a lot of patience and a little bit of guts, we could pull it off. But at the end of the day, Turks and Caicos had some really interesting fundamentals that a lot of people didn't know at the time. And certainly it's evolved now to where people understand it, where the legal system was exceptionally well designed. It mimics the British system. We have a British form of law, and we also have a land title system that made it easy for people to understand how they can own real estate or develop or be part of real estate projects there and feel secure. And it was just a matter of me learning that intensely and then being able to communicate it to those who might follow.
So because you took the time, you did the research, and you explored, which is a great line. I call it sloughing off and vacationing, but hey, what do I know? That you found.
Well, I did some of that too.
Right, of course.
Obviously.
I really would love to have done that back in my younger years, for sure. So you found an opportunity that was just waiting to be leveraged and communicated to potential investors are out there. So what made you choose to go with the condo hotel kind of way? Was that so you could more easily pay for it and get the funding? Maybe I'm completely wrong on that.
No, absolutely not. You're completely right. In fact, very much like my experience in Cape Town at the time when I was there was. It was all driven by the notion that the construction or the development of hotels obviously was driven by some very substantial dollars, and to the extent that those dollars could be raised either through public markets or private markets, ultimately determines whether something's going to get built. And there was virtually no financing whatsoever for a pure hotel development, unless it was somebody like, say, Club Med, who actually was our predecessor to the destination, who built in Turks and Caicos in sort of the late and early mid to late 80s. Just for boutique properties or even large scale properties in a destination like unproven destination like Turks and Caicos, what we really had to do was create a dream.
Right.
And we had to create a dream that we could share with a multitude of different customers who would want to participate in a residential opportunity, but at the same time also partner with a hotel operator who could help them to defray costs through a rental program. And that's what we ultimately, that was the service promise. That was the proposal that we made to our customers. And it worked. Yeah,
that's interesting to me because at this particular time, I don't think condo hotels was very commonplace in terms of being known as an investment vehicle for people. Again, I may be wrong. I may have just learned about it later on, but it seems to me that you were pretty much in a pioneering position at that particular time. So maybe for our listeners out there, you could explain the difference between why someone would want to invest in that particular type of product as opposed to just getting themselves a traditional like timeshare resort. Because it seems to me condo hotel is much more of an investment, where timeshare would be more of just like an opportunity vacation.
Absolutely. Well, in this case, we generally avoid the word necessarily just pure investment. This is a lifestyle investment, and the intent is that our customers are buying a second home,
right?
And that second home comes replete with a host of services and amenities and management expertise, and in particular, a focus on the luxury market,
right?
So when we design and come up with our concepts, it's invariably focused on ensuring that the product that we build can achieve two things. One is that we have an exceptional second home for that family or that couple who own that real estate. And secondarily, we have a product that will be appealing to the traveling public, who would otherwise perhaps select a Ritz-Carlton or a Four Seasons or another luxury property elsewhere in the region. They see this as a viable option. So our goal as the developer is to ensure that those two criteria are met. And if we can achieve that well, and once we have a product that is actually finished and opened, we can deliver on the service promise to the customer traveling, then everybody wins. And so ultimately the owner of the real estate is buying it because he or she wants a lifestyle, wants enjoyment out of it, but also sees it as a place to, let's just say, park some of their disposable capital, and let it work for them while they enjoy that investment, if you like.
Right.
And so that formula has worked really well mostly because it is a destination that people love to go to. It's easy to get to. And we've been able to demonstrate over our 20-year period that we can build a very high quality that meets the standards of anywhere in the world. So that buyer who might be looking at a piece of real estate in Texas or the coast of North Carolina or even South Florida, or you name a place on the planet, this can meet any of the standards that they would see there.
Excellent. So let's bookend this a little bit. Tell me about the new project, Rock House, that you're going to be doing in Turks and Caicos, and how things have changed since that first development in the 1990s to where we are getting on 2020s.
Wow. Well, Rock House is an exceptionally unique property and project, and this was driven really by the notion. The whole idea of ownership of residential real estate in Turks and Caicos has taken fire, obviously in a small way, but in the Turks and Caicos way, it's a very vibrant and active market. And so the world knows that ownership of real estate in Turks and Caicos is a very viable and enjoyable option. And invariably, for the past 20 years, that's been focused almost exclusively on, in the resort sector, almost exclusively on Grace Bay Beach, which is, of course, the beach that everybody knows and is generally familiar with. But what has happened behind the scenes is there's been this incredible growth in the single-family market. And so you have a lot of single-family homes being built around the island at very, very large numbers. But nobody has actually tried to create a combination of the single-family product in a resort section or resort concept that captures all the things that Turks and Caicos are known for, but also gives some level of privacy and also delivers a resort-like experience inside of it. And that's what Rock House is. But Rock House, the difference with it compared to, say, the resorts that we've done in the past, it's not on Grace Bay. It's on the north coast, so it's about sort of a half a mile from Grace Bay on its own private stretch of land with its own private beach. And the site is very indicative of sites that we know and have enjoyed in places like Capri in the south of France and the Mediterranean coast, where you have this rugged edge kind of coastline that then terminates in this incredible blue crystal water. And so we're trying to replicate a concept that has worked for years in iconic properties in the south of France or in Capri. And a rock house is intended to bring a single-family residential experience into a resort setting. So ultimately, we'll have 41 homes on this property, but each one of these homes will be sold and managed under the same structure that I just described to you,
right?
Where the owner has obviously use of it as he or she wants, and when they're not using it, it is a resort property that's managed by a professional hotel management company.
I love that, and I feel like consumer trends are catching up to what you've been doing for a long time, because we're seeing people don't just want to necessarily go to a region in the Caribbean and just get a hotel room. They want to have that home-like experience more often wherever they travel, thanks to the sharing economy and sites like Airbnb, bringing this into the forefront of consumer consciousness, for example. So it's great to see that you could do something different like this that's really appealing to the customer today. So how else has the luxury consumer changed in the time that you've been running and creating new Grace Bay resort properties?
Well, I think when we first started, what was really the question everybody had on their minds was whether or not we could sell very in a high priced, or at least very high quality, and obviously commensurate with its price, really high level of finish, to where we were pricing it at a market that would be considered as high end luxury product. Whether or not those buyers would agree to the concept of being really a hotel, and where they would be comfortable with the notion of their unit or their home, if you like, being used by a multitude of paying customers.
Right.
And we were able to demonstrate to our buyers that what we're selling our hotel room stay, that customer is the same demographic. It's the same peer group as that person who owns it. So what you're seeing is a very high level of a high quality customer staying in the hotels, such that the owner of the condominium or the owner of the residential real estate is satisfied that it's not going to be used for it's not going to be demolished. It's not, the wear and tear is not going to be such that it actually makes no sense. So and we're able to charge a commensurate amount of money for the home stay or the hotel stay that makes it worth their while. That's really one of the key things. And so what we're seeing is buyers of real estate that in the past would be, you can cite numbers of $1 million up to $8 million, and anywhere on that spectrum, those owners have gotten comfortable with the concept of renting their home or their condominium to the traveling public, as long as there is a professional management company behind it. That is where things, I think, were really, really different, or really have evolved, where even though we would ordinarily think of someone who's spending $3 or $4 million is not going to want somebody renting their home.
Right.
That is proven false. And it's mostly because frankly, one of my very high-end clients many years ago, and he's a very, very large, a very accomplished business family in New York City, in the real estate market, and he called me one day and he said, "Look, I don't want to rent, but I'm sick and tired of you calling me and asking me for checks."
Right.
So rent it. So he didn't, and in the day he just didn't want to send checks. He didn't want to keep paying for something he wasn't using. And he said, "I'll use it every 3 weeks or every 4 months or whatever, but I'd rather not have to send you a check every month for my maintenance costs. Can you fix that for me?" And we said, "Yeah, well, we're going to put a very high-end customer into your home and create this environment that is so luxurious that we'll have lots of demand to facilitate, and you can turn that switch off whenever you want."
Right. That's cool. So other than not wanting to put the effort into actually writing a check, what is the motivation for somebody that's uber wealthy and can afford a second or third home for millions of dollars to actually want to put it into a rental pool? What's kind of in it for them? Is it getting the money back from the investment so they could take their wife out to dinner or their husband out to dinner? What do you see as their motivation?
Well, ultimately, all of our buyers are successful businessmen and women on their own right. So nobody likes idle capital. And so here you have a world-class residential home that could be otherwise generating revenue.
Right.
It's kind of like a boat or a really nice car. If it doesn't get driven or get used, it actually deteriorates faster. And the notion that the property is being used with care, but also generating a reasonable yield makes people feel better. They just feel better.
Right.
And so if I say to an owner of a $2 million condominium, for example, that last year it generated $100,000 of free cash flow after you stayed there for 2 months, which is a real fact, that starts to sound pretty attractive.
Right.
And if that home was in the Hamptons and was left empty for how many months a year, and all it was just one big hole in which you poured money.
Right.
It's two different animals. So I think that these are really sophisticated buyers who understand that, and they go in with their eyes wide open. And because the market is so vibrant, the ability to change your mind and potentially liquidate your asset and move on is there. So you're not trapped into this decision forever. It's a pretty active environment for the sale of this real estate too.
Excellent. Very interesting. I'm really enjoying learning about how this whole side of the business works, because a lot of times I've been exposed to condo hotels as, hey, put some investment into this building in Miami, and then the board that's made up of the individual owners don't actually want to improve the property at all, and everyone seems to run into trouble maintaining that property and keeping it fresh as new competition comes into the area. But it sounds like this super high-end discriminating customer is very different and is ready to make sure that the properties are always in the best shape as possible as consumer trends change and design changes happen.
Well, yes, but also the difference with what you just described as a Miami experience, we don't have condominium associations involved in the management of the property. We have professional hotel management companies, and that is our company who does that.
Right.
Our team of hospitality managers consists of Ritz-Carlton, Four Seasons, one and only Taj Hotel trained hospitality people.
So the elite of the elite.
Yeah, so they know how to run hotels, and we know how to run hotels. So you aren't going to be listening to some kind of condo association board that maybe is focused on small things, when actually a hotel management company is running the show. And to the extent that management company is making a good return on its effort, then you're going to see a very highly maintained hotel, and so you won't have to worry about those things.
Excellent. So you've got 10 different properties, I think, right now?
We've developed and been involved in 10 different properties in Turks and Caicos. At this point, we have 5 on the go.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. So it seems like you just want to own all of Turks and Caicos, right?
Well, I'd love to. I mean, it's such a beautiful place. If we could own more, we certainly would. It's breathtakingly beautiful, and 20 years later, we still love it. So, but I think our goal really is to ensure that the infrastructure, the human infrastructure that we have there, and that's probably not a good way to describe it, but just our people. We have an incredible team of people. It's 500 plus strong. And it's taken a long time to develop that. And relationships in this country are everything. We have families that we've seen grow up. We have children that we've sent to college. We've done some incredible things for the communities, the schools, the churches, the government generally. And it's just really hard to do business generally in these jurisdictions, because there's so many different cultural differences in the way some of our customers think, to where the way the properties are operated, the way the government works. So it takes years to understand all those sort of nuances, and we've now got it to a place where we think we have the ability to scale up some of our operation, and
great.
It's just so exciting for us, and I can't imagine a better time for our company. But again, we're keeping our heads down and trying to stay as focused as we can and disciplined as we can, because just now you blink an eye and a hurricane shows up, and you got to shift gears. So. Yeah,
that was actually it's a good way to segue into that particular conversation. In the last 20 years, my unscientific opinion is that we're starting to see stronger, more frequent storms in aggregate over time. How is that affecting the way that you approach stuff? Are you maybe going into different construction techniques? Do you just put your fingers in your ears and close your eyes and hope for the best? What do you do?
Well, we are very fortunate. Turks and Caicos is a fairly young destination on relative terms, and everything that's built there is built to a code that actually mimics the code in South Florida.
Great.
So when and if we have hurricane, a brush with a hurricane, which we've had our share, and obviously last year was the most influential, but our buildings and our structures are built to withstand the most ferocious of storms, and they proved that again in the last storm in September.
Amazing.
So yes, we do in some respects kind of plug our ears and close our eyes, but we also know that we have buildings that can withstand what is coming. I think where we'll adjust our thinking going forward, now that we've coming through a pretty challenging storm of last year, is that we'll just be more prepared to deal with the aftermath with insurance and how we manage expectations and what we do on the ground, because we learned some really valuable lessons. And of all the lessons that I learned, the one that came so intuitive to me and to our team was really, first thing is to take care of our staff.
Right.
And that's what you do. Because these jurisdictions are tiny. Turks and Caicos is a small jurisdiction.
What kind of population do they even have?
We have 35,000 approximately.
They're very small. That's that's the size of my hometown.
Yeah, everybody knows everybody, right? And so right after the hurricane, our first step was to just ensure that our teams were safe. And where they weren't, that we took care of them, and where we needed to replace and repair damage to homes of our teams, we did that as a priority, because just the ability to affect change in those environments was so immediate.
Right.
But it was needed, and so we had to kind of be the big brother in that exercise, and that was one thing we learned. That we would do over 10 times over.
Fascinating. The other issue that you have to deal with is airlift to the destination. And that's always a question I like to talk to my Caribbean friends about, because you're investing all of this time, effort, and money, but in the end of the day, a lot of times you're beholden to an airline deciding whether or not to come in to Turks and Caicos. How does that work for you, and how has it changed maybe over the last 25 years from the time it was a sleeper destination to now in the consciousness of people?
Well, we've been fortunate in that we've had some pretty substantial private sector investors to step up to the plate here in Turks and Caicos, and in the form of obviously all the resorts that we compete with, and they're all independent boutique operations, sort of 100, 150 room properties that have succeeded in replicating the model that we've been talking about. Right. But also there's also the presence of a very substantial contributor to the destination, and that is the Beaches hotel chain. They have been exceptionally powerful in helping the destination to secure stable airlift. And that, I think, a lot of us perhaps underestimate. I certainly don't, but maybe some do. Their ability to fill planes and help those planes continue to be profitable to the extent that we can all kind of coattail on that.
Right, that's great. That's a really interesting point of view, because I would say, now I'm just guessing at the number, but they've got to be bringing in thousands of people every single week.
It's massive.
Yet they're not really competing against you in the same sort of way, because they're they're looking almost for a different audience that's looking for a different vacation type of experience, is my guess.
You're absolutely right. You nailed it, Glenn. You couldn't be more right about it. We cater to two different sectors, even though they do have a high-paying guest who could equally stay with us or any other of our competing properties. They may have a different agenda with their children or what have you. And Beach is doing an exceptional job of catering to that market, and we all enjoy the fruits of that largesse in the form of those planes that are pretty steady to our destination. So I think one of the things that has helped us grow is that very presence.
Yeah. You fly out of the planes come from New York or just from like Florida?
Oh no, when we first started, it was only a flight out of Miami. So
right.
Back then, I could only get out of Miami once a couple times a week.
Right.
Or even earlier when Pan Am used to fly there. But now it's. I mean, our airlift is incredible. On Saturdays we have 25 flights coming in.
Amazing.
Internationally.
Right.
But that's all new. But it's Charlotte,
Wow.
It's Atlanta, it's Miami, it's Fort Lauderdale, it's Washington, D.C., Boston, Chicago, New York, Newark, Houston, Dallas.
Yep.
That's a pretty good list.
Yeah, that's a really good list. So it seems like everything's in pretty good shape for you. You've got a great strategy. You've been at it for 25 years now, creating all of these great different types of properties. So besides Rock House, you said you're looking to do numerous more projects, all in Turks and Caicos. Yes.
I think where we see probably growth in our brand over the next year to two is going to be in our single-family branded residential division.
Right.
We started that about 5 years ago, and it's growing exponentially in relative terms. We have 7 homes under that brand,
Beautiful.
and these are all homes that are sort of $5 million of value and plus.
Goodness.
All beachfront, spectacular homes that are all part of the brand and managed and rented through our program. So we see that going to somewhere between maybe a dozen to 20 homes over the course of the next few years. I think on the resort sector, once Rock House is built out and we've expanded our footprint at Point Grace, we will be a pretty sizable operation in the Turks and Caicos. So we may have to take stock and see what the next step is, because we're getting calls for partnership deals on a regular basis, and we got to be careful about which ones we pick.
Yeah, you absolutely do, and not just the folks that you're going to engage with, but also the locations that you think you want to go into. So, have you earmarked the next big location that you think is gonna be a great home for one of your resorts?
We have, and we have a couple in mind. As a matter of fact, they're all very within close proximity of everything that we have today. And I think our biggest challenge will be to try and come up with a concept that excites the market. And,
right.
We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But
cool.
We certainly have our eyes on a few things.
Right. Now, I would totally ask you what those were, but I know you're not going to tell me what they are, because then all of the competitors that are listening to this are going to go to those destinations. So I'll do us both a favor and move on. So, Mark, is there anything else that we didn't get to in our conversation that you've got to share with the world?
Well, I think I'd love for everybody to know that if they haven't already read about it, about 3 weeks ago we closed on a transaction of an iconic property in Turks and Caicos that we for many years felt was perfect for an expansion of our brand, and that's a resort property known as Point Grace.
Terrific.
Which we acquired recently, and it's a very special property with a very special character and personality, and we're looking to try and take that into the modern era.
Right.
It's
so
an exciting place.
So you're going to totally reinvent the property, but keep it in its roots of kind of like that old school British kind of feel, but with more of the modern amenities. That kind of a situation.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think architecturally people like it, and so our goal is to try and make sure that the room experience, that the amenity experience, the food and beverage experience is commensurate with what our competitive setup brings to the table. And those are areas where people allow you to take a little bit more creative liberties, and so the food and beverage experience will be dramatically enhanced and expanded, and hopefully we grow the hotel to a larger size over time.
Right. So
we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but I mean, in terms of location, it's about as good as it gets anywhere in the world, and so we're really excited about the opportunity, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Great. And how about before we wrap up, you give yourself a good, shameless plug on how people could learn more about you or any other kind of messaging you want.
GraceBayResorts.com. That should cover it. Find all about us there, and I appreciate that, Glenn.
Yeah, my pleasure, and I appreciate you so much for being on this show with me today. And for all of you listeners out there, man, that was a really fun conversation. I think we learned an awful lot about a different segment of the business that we don't awfully talk about enough, I think. As much as I love talking about that franchise side of the business, it's great to hear about the other side of this business that Mark Durliat has done so well. So, Mark, thank you so much for being here today. And for everyone listening out there, thanks for listening. And I'm going to be back next week. That is, unless I totally decide to move to Turks and Caicos and live on the beach. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for listening to No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast, with your host, Glenn Hausman, online at rouse.media, on Twitter at Traveling Glenn, and on Facebook.com/Glenn.Hausman. We'll catch you next time.